Jason Murphy, Against the Stream, Wednesday night, Dharma, meditation, topic, discussion. Glad you're here. Those of you online, those of you in the room, and those of you in the future who are checking us out in the YouTube world. Glad you're present. Okay, so let's sit. We're going to sit for a while. I kind of asked if there was anyone new. There really wasn't. So we'll sit for a bit and get free. Let's get free. I'm going to work a little bit with some what you would call hindrances tonight, kind of in the meditation, and then we'll expand a little bit later as I'm going to talk about the middle path. Actually, I'm going to talk about sex. I'm talking about sex, drugs, and money. I think that's my topic tonight: sex, drugs, and money. And so we'll be working a little bit with the hindrances as a practice. All right. So once we gather the attention for a while, we'll do some kind of concentrating, collecting attention, and then kind of opening up, utilizing the four foundations to really seeing what's alive in the mind and the body in terms of the hindrances. And so I'll just say a little bit about that now before we kind of jump into the meditation. So at ease. So the hindrances, ultimately, there's five, and there's a talk that I'll do at some point called the 10, the 5, the 3, and the 1, which is basically that all of the hindrances, all of the kind of negative cognitions that kind of come up in our mind can be broken down into the 1, which is the main aspect of Buddhism, which is to be free from delusion. And being free from delusion takes a lot of work because we were born into delusion. So the lens of the hindrances helps us kind of look at maybe the most common 5, which are basically kind of lust or wanting, craving, and then the opposite of that, aversion, anger, resentment, ill will. And then there is sleepiness, or what's called sloth and torpor, sluggishness of mind, sinking mind, sometimes it's called. And then the opposite of that, which is restlessness, agitation. So that's the 4. And there's actually 7, but they break down in pairs. Sloth and torpor, restlessness, agitation, right? So, and then the last is doubt. And doubt meaning kind of questioning our own ability, questioning practice, questioning our own self-worth, questioning all of the things that we question. So we'll go into some of that tonight. All right, so yeah, let's just that much for now. Let's just kind of settle in. Finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable, one where you can feel relaxed and alert. And then perhaps, just checking in. Just doing a bit of a mindful or a mental check-in. What's happening here in this body, in this mind? Is there something left over from the day that's kind of spinning in the mind? Some kind of rumination, some type of obsession? Is there something that is in the forefront of the mind, thinking-wise? Just acknowledging what's present. Taking a few of those deeper breaths and dropping down into the body. What's present here? What kind of energy is present? Sleepy, energized. Good. And then in some way, just aiming the attention towards the experience of hearing sound arising, passing away. And then as we aim the attention towards the experience of breathing, tip of the nose, rise and fall of the belly, the experience of the chest expanding, contracting, whatever feels easiest to connect to, wherever you can most kind of strongly feel the experience of breathing. Aim the attention there. And then sustain that attention for as long as possible. Sometimes it's helpful to just kind of repeat some simple phrase, breathing in, breathing out. Of course, whenever you recognize that the attention wanders off, it's not a problem. Just with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, patience, compassion, this is what the mind does. Thinks, plans, remembers. Just kind of looking to the mind for a moment with your awareness, and then aiming the attention back in a very intentional and kind or friendly way to the breath, the experience of breathing without judgment or criticism, just here. recognizing if there is restlessness or agitation in the mind, in the body. If so, seeing if you can focus the attention a little bit more narrowly on the breath, perhaps a little deeper into the body, the belly. If there is some sleepiness or sluggishness of mind, perhaps a result of the day, perhaps a hindrance from practice, seeing if you can either just kind of imagine some brightness in your heart, in your mind, seeing the glow behind the eyes, the coolness of the breath in the nostrils. Again and again, just recognizing when the attention wanders off, taking that moment to just see what's present in the mind. Is there a hindrance present? Some craving or fantasy, some aversion, some doubt, some restlessness, some sleepiness. Just acknowledge what's present and then aim the attention back. Whenever we recognize that the attention has wandered off, perhaps a thought or a sound that has caused a stream of thoughts and memories, just acknowledging what's present, seeing if there is one of the hindrances, just naming it. Lust is in the mind, agitation is in the mind, doubt is in the mind. And then aim the attention back. This breath, this sitting, breathing body. again and again. Expanding the awareness towards the content of the mind. What's present here? What thoughts, themes, what moods, emotions? Is there some hindrance as it subsided? So aiming the attention, the third foundation of mindfulness, aiming the attention toward the mind itself with curiosity, not contempt. An open observation of what's present here without pushing away or clinging to. All right. So if you have any questions about the meditation practice, the instructions that I just gave, you can either write a question in the chat, or you can you can raise your little hand in your participants. I think it's there, and then let us know. Otherwise, I'll open up at the end. Good. So maybe just for yourself, just kind of reflect. What was that like the last 30 minutes or so? You might have actually sat a little longer than that. So I'm excited for this topic, something that I've given quite a bit of attention to in my life: sex, drugs, and money. Quite a bit of attention, both in a heedless way and um, in a kind of constructive way and in a renunciation way. I don't think I'll be able to unpack it all tonight. So actually, I think it's going to turn into a three-part series where I'll try to tackle each one. So sex, drugs, you know, addictive behaviors, and money or power tend to be in my view, the three aspects of this world that, the Buddha, I think, had some very clear kind of, you know, suggestions and instructions around, but as Westerners, it makes Buddhism difficult for us. uh, Tackling this idea of renunciation or, what seems extreme, giving it up or not using money at all, or, abstinence from all substances. Many people that experience Buddhism are like, whoa, like I like the mindfulness stuff and the loving kindness stuff, but when it gets to, it just seems a little preachy, or something like that, or like we're coming from some kind of Puritan kind of stance. And to be honest, most teachers don't even talk about these fucking topics, because they're taboo, because they're um, difficult, because a lot of teachers, in my experience over the last 2 decades, uh, struggle with these three questions, these three aspects, and I myself, as I started to say, have struggled with and examined, and definitely haven't perfected it. But let me just kind of give a little bit of historic reference. Prior to the Buddhist teaching, there in ancient India at the time, there was either kind of heedlessness, kind of extreme kind of heedless behavior, debauchery, that kind of thing, or extreme mortification. That the Buddha, you know, practiced both of these extremes at one point. Hate, as a young prince, he was basically kind of coddled and given everything he wanted. And, the Buddha was actually kind of a badass. Like he fought, he was like learned archery because he was going to take over the army. Like that was his job. He wanted to be a warrior. So he was a warrior prince before he, decided to give it all up. And an interesting kind of not very known fact. And he had concubines, and he was young. He had servants, and he was very there was a lot of sex and a lot of heedlessness, a lot of kind of gimme, 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 and he had there were several kind of temples or palaces depending on the time of year. If it was a rains retreat, they would go to their house in the Hamptons. If it was winter, they would be in Vale. They were kind of well to do in that way. And and then Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, got married and had a child, and was kind of in line to be the king. And then he stepped out, and there's more to that story, but we won't get into that so much today. But he shifted, basically seeing just the perpetuation of suffering in this, what he called tanha, craving endlessly for desired, pleasurable outcome. Right. And then the extreme mortification that was happening at the time was also, like yogis and sadhus that were like, they would wear no clothes, they wouldn't eat, they would, just do yoga and meditate in caves and, grow their beards real long. This kind of stereotypical, I think I remember like in like, I'm not sure if it was a Natural Geographic or the Guinness Book of World Records. I remember seeing this yogi like fold himself up into a box at some point, like in the kind of late 70s. And it was like a big deal. And then that was like my first introduction, but that had been happening for thousands of years, And so and the some of the extreme kind of mortification or renunciation practices that were present at the time that the Buddha engaged in prior to his kind of full awakening was extreme, like, not eating for days, only eating, drinking water and eating like 1 grain of rice is one of the things, or like, like a mouthful of porridge or something like that, just enough to not die, basically. And this idea of like, can we disidentify with the body, because in the idea at the time, the body was the problem, identification with the body, and that if we can disidentify with the body, then we can disidentify with the mind, and so that was part of the practice, I guess. In my time as exploring in monasteries and traveling around the world, and in Asia and India, I've come across several monks, and I've actually had a teacher that was a monk for 8 years, and he talked about at one point in his early, like, first year or two, he had so much lust in his mind as a fully ordained monk in Burma, so much lust, living in a monastery with only men, and like the people who helped run the monastery, which were often families and sometimes women. But there was so much lust in the mind that he thought about cutting off his genitals, which I was like, whoa, like that's pretty intense, because there was so much of this kind of part of that self-mortification, and like, I just need to get rid of this desire. Ultimately that didn't happen for him, and he, after several years, left the monastery as a monk, and has a family, and has raised kids, and is living as a lay teacher. Teachers that still might get laid someday. That's what I like about lay people, lay teachers, right? So this idea of like, there was some of this kind of maybe misunderstanding about kind of hatred of sex organs or desire. Like desire was all bad. So, the Buddha came from this place of having kind of concubines and servants, and, anything he wanted, basically any time. Even though he was married, it was like, he still had, it was like an open marriage, it was like an arranged marriage. So he went from that, ultimately seeing that there was no end to it, and there's no real satisfaction in it, that it just leads to more. This is the addictive, compulsive, craving, wanting behavior of, just constantly seeking pleasurable experience after pleasurable experience to fulfill some unquenchable thirst, And so that's one extreme. And then the other extreme, completely giving it all up to the point of like, dying, or also just becoming so rigid. I've seen this within the American Buddhist kind of, hierarchy, or as Noah likes to call, the establishment, which we are also kind of rebelling against here. that there's this kind of puritanism that is very American, right? Very European, very kind of English and Irish, and I mean, not just that, but just the Puritans that came, right? The Pilgrims, who caused a lot of fucking havoc in this country, but they also brought this kind of Puritanism with them, and that's found within a lot of religions, right? So the middle way, which is really what the Buddha taught, having gone to these two extremes and then coming to this middle path, is how do we advocate for neither extreme puritanism or extreme kind of permissiveness? How do we find this kind of balance, right? All of the Dharma is about balance, about equanimity, about being free from delusion. So practice, this mindfulness practice by itself, is really helpful. Mindfulness, meditation, loving kindness, really helpful. Yet we need direction. And the Buddha saw this. And so the Buddha gave, 5 precepts to lay people. And within people who joined the order, right, monks and nuns, there was, 227 rules of conduct that actually monks evolved into, where it started with the 5 and then the 8 and then the 10. And I'm not going to go into each one, like what do they mean? And you could look them up. You could fucking Google it. Mike will probably Google it and have a list by the time we're done. No, you don't have to do that. I'm just playing. But ultimately what there has been is more and more, okay, we need more direction. We need more kind of containment, because sex and power and drugs are super they're super powerful. The energy around desire is really strong. And there's this one quote or teaching from the Buddha that where he mentioned, if there was 2 powers as strong as lust, he would not have become awakened. He would not have enlightened. He would not have been enlightened. And so, knowing this, he knew that he had to leave the palace, leave his wife, leave his child, because the clinging or the attachment to those things would have been so strong that he wouldn't have been able to even free his mind up to that point. And then going to the full extreme of mortification and then seeing the futility in it, and that it's actually just causing more suffering and not actually, the pain isn't leading to awakening. It's actually just leading to kind of more rigidity, more, and ultimately almost his death, right? So this was kind of the extreme, and this is the bigger picture of the middle path and what is meant by the middle way within Buddhism. So so the direction, and so for monks versus kind of us householders, there's a pretty big difference, but it all starts with this first 5. But for monks, it's pretty simple around the idea of sex. And I was a monk myself, for brief periods of time. I've been in monastic life twice, and then visited and stayed various times other places. But it's really for monks and for nuns, it's easy. No sex, no masturbation, and strict guidelines around contact with the opposite sex. And so if you go to Thailand or Burma, you'll see a monk will get on a bus or on a boat. And if there's a woman present, a man will switch places with the woman. It just happens automatically. Or a woman will get up and move to allow the monk to kind of sit and not have a woman next to them. Not because women are evil, right? But because it's just, one, it's a sign of respect, and then also there is some reverence and some protecting of one's role. So the monastic role, and that's just the way things are in Asia, and it's just been passed down that way for centuries. And there's tons of stories of monks who have disrobed because they fell in love with the village woman who brought rice every day. That this happens, right? So I'm just going to read a little bit here about kind of the bhikkhu, or the fully ordained monk in the Theravada tradition, and what's some of the expectation, right? So, complete sexual continence is considered an essential feature of the monastic life. Intercourse, um, a heterosexual or of heterosexual or homosexual character is automatically considered a parijika offense, which means a monk who performs such an act is considered to be expelled from his or her role or in the order, right? So they have to give up their robes. They're no longer considered a monk. Now, acts less than that can be, there's an atonement, or there's some kind of, like the monk that had a wet dream, let's say, and would go and tell the abbot, I had impure thoughts, or, it's kind of like a little Catholicism like that. Like they go and confess their, improprieties, and then maybe have some work to do around that, like recognizing lust or looking at the hindrance, but definitely not a disrobable offense. And so the idea is that we're going to have desire, even as a monk. Even as one of my teachers, a monk for 8 years, still had, sexual desire and lust in the mind. And when I was a monk, I actually found that even though I would barely even like see the opposite sex for me, although in the place that I was, there was monks, nuns, and lay practitioners, both monks and nuns, that were sitting retreats and coming to the monastery. And so it was happening, but I was really amazed at renouncing all of the 227 precepts, and then how much and how often lust would just arise in the mind as a hindrance to my meditation practice. So that was something, and it's something I've talked with many many other people that were monks, that were and even just if you go and sit a retreat, I mean, it's actually, I think it's harder when you're at Spirit Rock, or at one of these kind of like yoga places, and you're trying to like hold it all in, not make eye contact, kind of walking meditation, and then you see attractive people, and then the mind starts to wander because there's hindrance in the mind, not because we're bad people or that's a bad thing, but just because there is hindrance in the mind. And so the ability to look at that and to see that and to investigate that, maybe without acting out on it, which is what's one of the good things about either being in the monastic role or in the retreat role, and even just in our everyday life. Can we see this energy and not have to act? So that's some of the ways to kind of think about it. So as householders, right, we're given 5 simple. Well, I want to make one more point. So what I was just describing to you is a monk in a Theravadan tradition. So that is Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Southeast Asia. And so there's 2 schools of Buddhism. One is, well, there's more than that, but basically there is what's called the Theravadan, which is the path of the elders, or the narrow path. And then there's the Mahayana, which is considered the kind of larger path, or the broader path. And monks, so we're talking Zen, we're talking, there's certainly certain people even in non-Theravadan tradition that hold this kind of strict version. Like I think some Korean monks hold this kind of stricter version. But there's it's a little bit looser, like in Vajrayana, in Tibetan Buddhism, lamas can marry. I mean, there's all kinds of different versions that have kind of evolved. But Theravadan Buddhism is really kind of the path of the elders, meaning what the Buddha taught, and as close to the Buddhist order that was at the time. Just to say that. So okay, so that's pretty clear, right? no sex, no masturbation, no like being next to the opposite sex, which is interesting because it doesn't say anything about same sex. And if you're having, um, if someone is gay or queer or, bisexual or whatever, they might also be working with lust in those other areas. So it falls on the practitioner ultimately all the time. All right. So, it's less clear in the householder position. And then even less clear for some of us as, teachers who have taken on this role. And that, you've seen that. And I also want to just say, like, okay, so that's the ideal, but we all know that, and for this first happened within, within Hinduism, within yoga, within the yoga, especially American yoga tradition, tons of abuse of power and, sex cults and all this kind of weird shit that's come out of, um, basically the not being skillful in these areas and not actually even knowing very um, clearly what these guidelines even are. I mean, there was a place in Thailand I remember that had some, I don't know where he was from, maybe the Netherlands or something, and he was a self-proclaimed guru, and it was like this new age kind of meditation, yoga, healing center, and he was just abusing people all the time, like women, bringing them in and, manipulating. And it was just horrible. And that's happened here in the States. And that's even happened, within Buddhist tradition, right? And the thing that's interesting, and I'll just say this versus, what we had experienced here at Against the Stream, is that in almost every case, it's like there's some figurehead, and then there's, years later, there's like hundreds of people who disclose being abused, being manipulated, being sexually taken advantage of. And, here at Against the Stream, and, with Noah, just not to be in his defense too much, but just there was like, complaints that he was an asshole. I can be an asshole too. And one not related to teaching implication. And so that's a pretty stark difference, but still good thing for us to pay attention to. Again, that's our practice. So as teachers, it's challenging to look at this and to try to hold this, but then to look at that we have this within our own society here today. Okay, so the 5 precepts, I've gone over them before, but this is what the Buddha gave to householders. He was like, all right, so just don't do these 5 things, and you might have a chance to settle your mind and to wake up, right? And what are they? Abstain from harming living beings, right? So don't intentionally kill other beings, and then even the word ahimsa, do no harm. It actually also means emotional, physical, sexual. Like to really try to have a essence. And I think the person that I think is the most prime example of that is Thich Nhat Hanh. I think that Thich Nhat Hanh has held this, do no harm in every breath. I really see that in the teachings and in his students. So the second is to abstain from taking that which is not given. So, not stealing, right? Not causing the negative karma or the negative energy of stealing or being a thief. And then to abstain from sexual misconduct, which was what we're talking about. We'll break that down a little bit more. And then to abstain from false speech, right? Lying, manipulating, slander, gossip, that kind of thing. To abstain from intoxicants and harmful drugs, which lead to heedlessness. This is kind of a little bit of there's a tweak on that, because so many retranslations of what the Buddha talked about around intoxicants is tweaked slightly, because so many Westerners have a really hard time and even monks that I know. I know monks that drink, monks that like take drugs that did while they were monastics. Usually not Westerners. Most uh, Thais. When I was in Thailand, I'm not sure about Burma, but when I was in Thailand, I would be amazed when I would see, you know, monks like drinking a little shot of whiskey or whatever. Um, so so there's that, right? Uh, so I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about Buddha's teaching on sexual misconduct. So, what the Buddha kind of pointed out specifically, and I want to just first name that, yeah, there's some patriarchy and hierarchical kind of structure in here. Let's just get into it because this was 2,500 years ago. So, he avoids unlawful sexual intercourse, abstains from it. He has intercourse, like he has no intercourse with girls who are still under the protection of their father or mother, brother, sister, or relative, nor with married women, nor female convicts, nor no, and lastly, with betrothed women. So that's the thing, right? And then here's the next piece, right? If a man could observe greater restraint than this, so much the better. The Buddha's outlook on this question was then realistic. It was realistic for his age, for his time, and we should endeavor to view the subject as realistically as possible in the light of our kind of modern conditions, right? So this idea of like, okay, so don't have sex with people that don't, well, I mean, unlawful, right? So avoid any kind of sex with anyone that feels pressured, that is, rape, that is manipulative, that is, like unwanted, non-consensual, right? Abstain from it. No intercourse with children or people that are, still living within their home. And that's a little like, what does that mean? Is it someone that comes back from college and is living with their home? But I think what they're talking about is young people. People that are still kind of under the guides of their parents. And then with married women, of course, all of this is talking about directly men and women, and it's basically saying we're the lustful ones, and women are in some way the victims. In some ways, what's being talked about here, and this is actually an age-old view from India that is really problematic and still problematic and very misogynistic and um, things that I witnessed while traveling through India. Um, that there's a lot of really, really strong, rigid kind of roles and views, and misogynistic kind of mentality that's still very present. Um, okay, so what was I gonna? Let's go to that. Oh yeah, that we have to make light of it in modern conditions, and that there's equality here on both sides. For men, for women, for transgender, for whatever expression of sexuality. That's why I really like the idea of just kind of be wise with one's sexual conduct. Like what does that mean, right? Craving, um, even to some degree, like what is one's relationship with porn, with porn addiction, with sex addiction, acting out trauma, just to kind of watch the craving, watch the tanha associated with that is, I think, the essence here. Um, and there's more. So, but yet we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to open up for some questions first now, just based on some of the things I've said. And you know what? I also want to just say, like, look, I'm not perfect, and I may have not said something or said everything. I'm a, white heterosexual male, and I make mistakes, and I have the conditioning that I have, and and I may have said something that might have felt offensive to somebody. And please know that that's not my intention. And it looks like Mike did brought up the Vinaya. If you want to look at the 227 rules that monks live by. And by the way, women, bhikkhunis, nuns, have they self what's the word? They kind of the self-involved, or they self-created 337 precepts. I guess they felt like they wanted to kind of outdo the monks by a couple precepts. So they felt like they needed it, for whatever reason. But that wasn't imposed upon them. That's something that was self-generated, is what I'm kind of pointing to. Okay, so questions, clarification, anyone in the room or online. You can either type a question in the chat or raise your hand. Jesse, please, if you can unmute yourself.
Hey, Jason.
Hi.
Thanks so much, bud. Hey, guys. So something I've been thinking about with this, you spoke about the yogi who could fold himself into a box, or maybe, somebody who's meditating and has this huge enlightenment, like is able to travel above themselves and see the world from a different perspective, or just have these super enlightening experiences. And then, so myself, I've struggled with, addiction and drugs and alcohol. And I've had times when I've meditated and had these amazing enlightened experiences, or when I was practicing yoga and I was going for weeks, months, and I just knew what it felt like to really just be present on the mat, and almost like when you're meditating and you don't have to really think too much about what your mind's doing. It just all comes. And so I think my question is, what do you say to someone who is wondering uh, about chasing that almost like a high that could be comparable to drugs, alcohol, money, sex?
Yeah.
What do you say to that in relation to meditation, or like you recognize with yoga, or trying to get beyond that chasing of it?
I mean, great question. I'm glad you brought it up. I feel like that's the trap that happens for a lot of people that come to practice, whether it's yoga or meditation or both, or mantra, or whatever it is that you will have experiences, and they will be feel enlightening. Uh, I mean, there's whole 7 factors of enlightenment that actually I was thinking about going into. Maybe I'll do that next. Where there's joy, which arises, spontaneously, and there's clarity, and there's this kind of, there are these experiences, and what you'll find, and those of you who have tried it have probably figured it out, as soon as you cling to it, it disappears. You're no longer experiencing that, and that's why it's not full enlightenment. That's why you're not a Buddha, or an enlightened being, because one, there's craving in the mind. That's a hindrance, right? So one of the definitions of full enlightenment is that there is no more hindrances present. So in other words, pleasure comes, piti, joy, tranquility comes, clarity comes, and there's no clinging to it. It just is. And so as long as we cling, we suffer, right? So even when it's pleasant, even when it's really good. And I remember having these kind of amazing experiences, and then there would be a clinging, and then a fear of losing it, and then it was gone. And then that was it. That was an insight that I'll never have again. And who knows what would have happened had I not been able to do that. But the ego is strong, the dark forces are strong. So that's my thoughts about it. And it doesn't mean that it's bad if we're going to have those. We're going to have those. If you stick around long enough, that's the beauty of meditation. We'll have some of these experiences, and to just allow them to be there, and slowly over time, I think that we begin to sustain longer amounts of those types of experiences. Yeah, but not to grasp to it, and not to strive for it too much either. And I think that's a huge problem we have here in the States. We're big strivers. We've got to strive to be something, right? Be enlightened, like what I think I read last week or the week before. Okay, anyone else? So this topic, I just kind of started to unpack it a little bit, and I just feel like it's so necessary to talk about, and that we all, I think we all, I'll speak for myself, struggle around sex and sexuality, and what does that mean, and what is intimacy, and what is sex versus intimacy, and, what is attachment, craving, desire? Is it good or bad? And do we, and I think some of the rigidity in not wanting to talk about it is like, it's bad, don't talk about it, and, the reason that, the Buddha was questioned a few times, and he would say, if there was a second power as strong as lust, I would not have become awakened. So for him, the simple practice was renounce anything that was unhelpful, unskillful, and the Buddha's kind of movement towards enlightenment, anything that he found that was unhelpful, unskillful, that hindered his path to awakening, path to enlightenment, he would renounce. And then on the other extreme of things, if he found that things were useful, helpful, nurturing, nourishing, the qualities of what's called, skillfulness, right? Then he would feed. He would invite in, and this is ultimately where there's this creation of seeing, discerning for ourselves, which is what I instructed you guys to do in the beginning of this, in the class during the instruction, is turn the attention, once it's calmed, once it's concentrated, turn the attention toward the mind, and just ask yourself kind of like, what's present here? What's going on here? Is it lust in the mind? Is it fear in the mind? Is there doubt? Is there hatred? What's here? We have different words for it, but ultimately it's, there's kind of only 5 things: craving, aversion, sleepiness or sluggishness, restlessness, agitation, doubt. So if we can just, and we don't got to get into getting into all the little pieces of it, because that's what we like to do. We like to stay really busy in our minds with oh, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And that's just another distraction. And so from the meditation perspective, And from the antidote perspective is what I kind of gave you. When you recognize that there's a hindrance in the mind, turn your attention toward it, acknowledge that there's a hindrance in the mind. When you recognize that there's not a hindrance in the mind, turn your attention toward it, acknowledge that there's not a hindrance in the mind. This is the practice of kind of working with hindrances. So we'll continue. Well, there's like another minute. A last thought question.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Sangha.
Yeah.
Just a thought that I had. It's more like when we talk about sexuality, it's kind of, for me, it's hard because it used to be an identity for me. You know, it used to be, it was an ego builder, you know, as I was growing up or when I was younger. And then, you know, and then it became an ego kind of destroyer, you know, because it didn't have any meaning, you know, after a while. It was just an act for the ego, and then it pretty much destroys how you think of, you know, your the other, your spouse or your girlfriend or whatever. And then so I had lots and lots of thoughts on that. That used to be, and it still is, it's a hindrance, you know, and it's because of that identity thing. I don't know if anyone can relate, but for me, it still becomes, even being married, you know, it's sort of like, hey, you know, it's marriage is this and this and this, you know, I give it a definition, and sex has a lot to do with it. So, you know, you have to kind of balance out, or I have to balance out, why should I identify, you know, sex with a relationship? And, you know, it's just hard sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that was my thought on it.
Uh-huh.
I know a lot of people don't like talking about it, neither do I, but
that's why I'm talking about it. Leaning into the discomfort, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Hiram. Let me end with this, and then it's a reflection from this, like I am in love, meaning I want to be happy. I want me to be happy, right? I love means I want to make the other happy. So Buddhists might reflect on and even meditate on these two statements at various levels. Like, I am in love, like what does love mean? Or I love, and what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to not have possessive love, but to have, you know, the unconditional love? How do we love? How do we utilize love, and how do we conflate, or how do we confuse sex and love? Because they are different, and they're different in lots of different ways, which I think you touched on a little bit, Hiram. And I'll pick this up next week. We'll probably, who knows, maybe we'll have 4 parts of sex, drugs, and money. But we'll get back to it. Please know that you can donate to the Against the Stream Center. You can do that by clicking the link that Mike put up. Thank you, Mike. And giving to our center, which, you know, we could use the support. It's been a while since we've really had a full house. So we are supported by those who attend. And we don't have a set fee. There's a $15 suggested donation, but we don't have a set fee. Whatever one can give supports us keeping the lights on and paying for the Wi-Fi, right? And and then you can also, on Venmo as well, you can also donate to us on Venmo at Against the Stream Meditation. And Yeah, thank you for being here and supporting us, and supporting yourself and your own practice. So just to take a moment and just acknowledge the goodness of your practice, the fact that we're here and we're sitting and observing the mind and the heart and working towards freeing our own hearts and minds. Just breathing that in, acknowledging that, and then knowing that we also do this practice to help support the freedom from suffering for all beings. May all beings be free, even you, even me.